1,000 miles inland from the shores of the Pacific, far from the sights and sounds of the sea. The town of Boulder, Colorado, is backed by the rugged bulk of the Rocky Mountains. 1,000 miles, but a boy from Boulder covered these miles and many more. Not always in a direct line, but always under full power. Here on Baseline Lake, he got his first waterborne experiences. And here he went to school. Today, other boys go to schools that bear his name, for he is known now, not only in the town where he was born in 1901, but throughout the nation and the world. Before he completed high school, the boy from Boulder went to work on one of the local farms. But a wise teacher who saw the boy's potential urged him to continue his education. There was a world of opportunity for him beyond this mountain community. She suggested he try for an appointment at the Naval Academy. This was a moment of decision that was to set the pattern for his life. First, there was a year of prep school. Then he entered the academy in 1919. He was an alert, eager student, as he would continue to be throughout his career. But he was ill-prepared in fundamentals for the demands that were to be made on him. It was an uphill battle, but he knew what he wanted, and he never did know how to quit. Later he said, "I nearly bilged out the first year. I had to work like blazes, but I got the habit of it." The result was a high academic record, in spite of the extracurricular distractions of Miss Roberta Gorsuch of Washington, D.C. 7 June 1923 offered a dramatic double feature in Arleigh Burke's life. He graduated from the academy and married the charming Bobby Gorsuch on the same day. Within a month, Ensign Burke went to sea in the battleship Arizona. In the years that followed, he was busy learning his trade, determined to perfect his skills for whatever challenge might lie ahead. 5 years with the Arizona, gunnery division, torpedo officer, engineering, plotting room. Then on to the USS Procyon and back to the Academy and the University of Michigan for postgraduate courses in ordnance and chemical engineering. 1931 found him at the Naval Gun Factory in Washington, D.C. The following year, Lieutenant Arleigh Burke reported aboard the Chester, 10,000 tons, one of the fast new American heavy cruisers. A specialist now in gunnery and ordnance, he spent much time with the crews handling the cruiser's 8-inch guns. With Burke aboard, the Chester exercised with other units of the fleet off the California coast. While westward, beyond the curving rim of the horizon, other men and other ships were also playing at the game of war. Destiny was weaving a web to trap the world. In foreign lands, dictators and military groups were playing on the fears and insecurity of people caught in the Great Depression that afflicted the entire world. Hate became a rallying call. And totalitarianism abroad drove nations to turn on their neighbors. As the pattern of conquest became clearer, the United States moved forward to meet the menace that could no longer be ignored. Recognizing the Navy as our first line of defense, Washington ordered greater speed in the buildup of the fleet. Among the new ships was the destroyer Craven, Executive Officer Lieutenant Arleigh Burke. The boy from Boulder, now thoroughly versed in the ways and tasks of the Navy, had found the weapon that would help him make history. His first destroyer, and his kind of fighting ship. Then, on a June day in 1939, Lieutenant Commander Burke was piped aboard the destroyer Mugford, the youngest destroyer skipper in the fleet. Under his command, the Mugford became a taut ship and a happy ship. His gun crews became the hottest marksmen afloat, winning many trophies and commendations, including the Gunnery E on all 4 guns. No other destroyer has ever equaled this record. In looking back, the year on the Mugford was symbolic in the career of Arleigh Burke. Here was the opportunity for command, in the type of ship that would earn him a name recognized throughout the world. Here were the torpedoes. And the guns that would speak with such authority across the battlefields of the Pacific. The accurate, hard-hitting 5-inch 38s. The skipper of the Mugford would have been happy to remain aboard these greyhounds of the sea. But in 1940, he was assigned to the Naval Gun Factory in Washington with the title of inspector. Europe was lashed by war, and it was clear now that America could not long retain its passive role. Guns were needed, and topping the list was the 5-inch 38. Burke threw himself into the assignment with the vigor and determination that had marked every step of his way. And there was a job to be done, and he gave it his full attention. Under his tireless leadership, men tackled the difficulties of the task and licked them in short order. Production moved swiftly forward. What had seemed an almost impossible task became a routine achievement. The 5-inch 38 was soon in quantity production, and the ships of the fleet were setting out to sea with this remarkable weapon. Sunday morning, 7 December 1941, the skies over Hawaii erupted in a hail of death and destruction. Among the victims was Commander Burke's first ship, the Arizona. With war a reality, Arleigh Burke asked for a chance to use the guns he had helped to produce. But the work he was doing was too valuable to the nation's war effort. So Commander Burke's first battle of World War II was to convince his superiors that he belonged at sea. Finally, his urgent requests were granted. A year after Pearl Harbor, December 1942, orders were cut assigning Arleigh Burke to a destroyer division in the South Pacific. For 23 years, he had prepared for this event, command in combat. The long years of study and preparation were now to be measured against the harsh realities of war. Like most career men, Burke had no illusions about the struggle that lay ahead. Here in the Solomons, the Japanese tide of conquest had finally been halted. But the enemy were strong and well-equipped. Our own forces were growing stronger every day. But we had a long way to come after Pearl Harbor. Night and day, the lean destroyers of Admiral Halsey's task force prowled the enemy-infested sea lanes, time and again disrupting the frantic efforts of the Japanese to reinforce their island garrisons. The romantic names of the islands seemed out of place in this explosive arena. Vella La Vella, New Georgia, Rendova, Bougainville. It was near Bougainville, in the Solomons, that Captain Burke commanded Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers. Most of his men were young and inexperienced. They needed training. And Captain Burke, who had made the Mugford a top contender in the destroyer fleet, showed his skippers and crews the way. Under his inspirational and vigorous leadership, the Little Beavers became a team, ready for any enemy contact. Experience mounted every day as Destroyer Squadron 23 patrolled the islands, carrying out gun strikes and intercepting Japanese supply craft. The Little Beavers were operating with Admiral Tip Merrill's task force when orders came to guard the approaches to Empress Augusta Bay. That was in early November 1943. Allied troops were going ashore to isolate the Japanese fortress of Rabaul. Shortly after 0200, a Japanese cruiser division was contacted. Merrill's task force moved out to meet them. The Little Beavers opened the show with a torpedo attack. Captain Burke reported, "My guppies are swimming." In the action that followed, the Japanese force was badly mauled. One light cruiser and one destroyer were sunk. 2 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers were sent to the repair shop. By 0340, the Japanese force was heading for home at top speed, with the Little Beavers in hot pursuit. With the American destroyer showing no sign of turning back, Admiral Merrill sent out a message. "Arleigh, this is Tip. For God's sake, come home. We're lonesome." 3 weeks later, From the headquarters of Admiral Halsey, Commander South Pacific Forces, came a dispatch to Captain Burke. Get athwart the Buka Rabaul evacuation line, about 35 miles west of Buka. If no enemy contact, by 0300 Love, 25th, come south to refuel, same place. If enemy contact, you know what to do. With one of his destroyers having boiler trouble, Burke reported his top speed would be held to 30 knots. But as he steamed north, he reported his position and making 31 knots. The next dispatch that was sent was addressed to 31-knot Burke as he directed his little beavers through the soft tropical night along the western shores of Bougainville. Thunderclouds began to gather and hung heavy in the sky as the squadron knifed through the waters of St. George Channel. At 0141, the destroyers made radar contact. There was no question. Burke had intercepted the Tokyo Express. His voice came sharply through the TBS. Hold on to your hats, boys. Here we go. And the little beavers set out to make naval history. Destroyer Division 45 moved to the attack, with Destroyer Division 46 trailing. Torpedoes were launched. And across the dark waters, flames leaped high against the sky as two enemy destroyers exploded and sank. Three other destroyers headed north, with the little beavers giving chase. When the enemy ships split up and raced for home, Burke and his ship stayed together to run one down and sink it with the 5-inch guns. The battle has since been described as an almost perfect action, one that may be considered a classic. Arleigh Burke had won a decisive battle and had earned a name, 31-knot Burke. With the wind-up of the Solomons campaign, Destroyer Squadron 23 was assigned to bombard the airfields and harbor of Cavien. On 23 March 1944, Captain Burke was detached from Destroyer Squadron 23 with orders to report to Admiral Mark Metcher aboard the flagship Bunker Hill. His new assignment was Chief of Staff, and a few months later he received the temporary rank of Commodore. In the months that followed, Task Force 58 and Commodore Burke were involved in practically every major engagement in the Western Pacific. With years of tin cans and the Black Shoe Navy behind him, Commodore Burke was in a new element. And he was learning the capabilities and special problems of the fighting flat tops. He helped to plan the strikes on the Carolines, the island of Palau, then on to New Guinea, Hollandia, the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and the never-to-be-forgotten Marianas turkey shoot. The war moved on to the Philippine Seas, to Samar Bay, the Sulu Sea, and Leyte Gulf, where the first kamikazes hurtled through the sky. Iwo Jima, topped by rugged Mount Suribachi, possibly the costliest battle of the war. Then Okinawa, hemmed by mines and savagely defended by enemy troops dug into caves in the rocky hillside. Japanese suicide pilots dedicated their lives to the Emperor before taking off on their final flights. Across the sky came hundreds of Japanese kamikazes. The divine wind, designed to sink the powerful American fleet. Suicide pilots rode their planes like guided missiles, flashing from the sky like thunderbolts. Most were knocked from the air, but some got through to smash in a final burst of glory on the decks of the invading fleet. The last big kamikaze attack came early in the morning of 11 May, when two evaded the protective barrage to crash on the flagship Bunker Hill. Admiral Metcher, with Commodore Burke and a skeleton staff, transferred to the destroyer English, and then to the Enterprise, while the Bunker Hill limped back to Puget Sound for repairs. As the war pushed on to the home islands of Japan, 31-knot Burke, reverting to the rank of captain, returned to Washington to head up the Research and Development Division of the Bureau of Ordnance. With the memory of kamikaze attacks still fresh in his mind, he turned his energies to the perfection of new weapons to meet future threats to the nation's freedom. He was among the first to recognize the potential in rockets and missiles. He sponsored research to develop and improve them. In 1949, as deputy in the office of the Chief of Naval Operations, Arleigh Burke was an outspoken champion of the Navy's vital role in national security, both in the present and the years ahead. In 1950, with the outbreak of war in Korea, Rear Admiral Burke was assigned as Chief of Staff to the Commander Naval Forces in the Far East. The following year, he became Commander of Cruiser Division 5. As a delegate to the armistice negotiations at Panmunjom, he saw the face and nature of communism clearly. He saw then that the only compromise with communism was complete submission. To 31-knot Burke, this could never be a solution for free men. His firm stand against communism has never wavered. In 1955, Rear Admiral Burke, Commander Destroyer Forces Atlantic, had hoisted his flag temporarily aboard the USS Miller when news arrived of his appointment as Chief of Naval Operations. He was relieved as Commander Destroyer Forces Atlantic by Rear Admiral Daniel and proceeded to the nation's capital. His appointment as Chief of Naval Operations came as a complete surprise to Admiral Arleigh Burke. Although he was 94th in the list of admirals, he was #1 in the talents needed for the Navy's top job. Suddenly, he was faced with new and heavy responsibilities. His Navy patrolled the seaways of the world, ready to meet aggression wherever it appeared. The fleet's effectiveness was seen when trouble flared in the Straits of Formosa. Within hours, the fleet was there, and the situation was under control. Lebanon was another hot spot that flared dangerously. The U.S. Sixth Fleet was cruising in the waters of the eastern Mediterranean, and Marines were landed to support the Lebanese government. Formosa and Lebanon underscored the value of mobile naval forces as an instrument of American policy. Under Admiral Burke, the Navy has become more truly global than ever before. He has also worked hard to expand the prestige of his office in many ways. He established close, friendly relations with other leaders of the free world and met with them both here and abroad. He invited many allied naval representatives to this country to meet and work with their American counterparts. To strengthen the navies of smaller powers, Arleigh Burke sponsored the transfer of some of our mothball fleet. Here, Queen Frederica of Greece is accepting destroyers on behalf of the Greek Navy. Since Arleigh Burke first joined the fleet, the problems and the conditions have changed, but he has approached them with the same determination and the 31-knot vigor that has marked his dynamic career. He has dedicated himself to projecting his Navy solidly into the atomic age. In his years as CNO, nuclear power plants have been achieved and made possible dramatic feats of seamanship. Newer and faster carriers, cruisers, and destroyers have come down the ways, armed with modern missile systems, and with carrier aircraft operating at speeds in excess of Mach 2. Guided missiles have achieved remarkable accuracy and range. Anti-submarine warfare has reached a new effectiveness with the helicopter, aircraft, surface and submarine team tied together with new electronic detection devices. The Polaris Fleet Ballistic Missile System, with its constantly expanding range, is recognized as our most potent deterrent to nuclear war. And we have probed the wider horizons of space with rockets, missiles, and satellites for weather and navigation purposes. The career of Admiral Arleigh Burke has been long, inspiring, and dramatic, a personal achievement marked by courage, self-discipline, and a deep desire to serve the nation that gave him his opportunities. He has proved what he long maintained, that the security of free men is attained not alone by the arms and weapons of war, but more surely by the faith and decisive spirit of men who place freedom above all material possessions or comforts. Again and again, in peace and in war, Arleigh Burke has shown his devotion and loyalty to the highest concepts of patriotism. He has created a record and a legend that will live in the annals of the United States Navy along with such names as John Paul Jones, Farragut, Dewey, Halsey, Mitcher, and Nimitz. Somewhere today, there are boys in towns like Boulder, Colorado, on Midwest farms, on cattle country ranches, in the brick and granite canyons of big cities. Boys who will read of the far places of the earth and conjure up dreams of going down to the sea in ships. They'll discover the story of 31-knot Burke and draw courage from his courage, ambition from his example. And like each one of us, they'll salute the name and legend of a great American, Admiral Arleigh Burke.